Areas Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, or the TAPAS group. And this is in partnership with the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council and Ecoturismo Genuino. Apologies for my pronunciation. This is the first of 2 seminars on the Visitor Use Management Framework. The next seminar will be held on the 5th of July. And this seminar will be presented by Kerry Cahill of the National Park Service, and also by Susan McPartland of the National Park Service. And I just want to introduce the two agencies that are hosting this meeting before we go on to their presentations. The Interagency Visitor Use Management Council is a collaboration between 6 federal agencies that manage public lands in the USA. And the Council is a collaboration designed to increase awareness of and commitment to proactive, professional, and science-based visitor use management on federally managed lands and waters. The Council's mission is to provide guidance on visitor use management policies and to develop legally defensible and effective interagency implementation tools for visitor use management. And regarding our other co-organizer, Ecoturismo Genuino, this is a virtual community of consultants in Ibero-America that share experiences, knowledge, and ideas for the promotion of a genuine ecotourism within and around natural protected areas. So I wanted to introduce to you the TAPAS group as well, briefly. So the TAPAS group has a vision where we have a future where tourism associated with protected areas has a positive impact on biodiversity and where tourism is sustainable. We are a specialist group within the IUCN Commission on Protected Areas, and currently we have over 420 members globally who are drawn from a variety of different stakeholder groups. They include academics and consultants, people working in protected areas, donors, and students. If you're not already a member, we'd very much welcome you to join our network. This is the makeup of our ExCo at the moment. I chair the group, and then we have 3 thematic groups led by Sue Snyman on communities and heritage, biodiversity led by Yu Fei Lung, economics with Barbara Engels, and then we have 2 cross-cutting groups, knowledge development led by Megan Eplerwood, and capacity building led by Tiago Souza, who's on this call today. And then for our support groups, we have a membership group, a communication group, and an IUCN focal point. And if you're interested, the membership and communication leads will be up for re-election this year. We try to work on activities including knowledge development. So we create guidelines of best practice guidelines and journal special editions on particular subjects that interest our members. We try and help build capacity through various training and networking events. And recently we've just been holding a capacity building events on tourism concessions in protected areas in Southern Africa. If you want to find out more about the TAPAS group, we have a range of online links, and our membership application is there at the top. You're welcome to access these. And then just a small plug before we start, we're organizing a sustainable tourism conference in the Seychelles later this year on SIDS. If you're interested, please contact me. We have a call for papers that's open until the end of the year. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for participating in this meeting, and I'd like to hand over to Kerry and Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. This is Kerry Cahill, and I'm joined by Susan McPartland, my colleague here in the National Park Service, and we are very excited to be here today to share some information about the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council and our collaborative work together as 6 federal agencies, and also to share a bit about how we're applying the new guidance from the Council to different projects within our agency. So Susan will be sharing a case study, and as was already described, there'll be a second webinar where 2 of our other colleagues will be sharing additional case studies. So a little bit more about Susan and I. We both work in the National Park Service Denver Service Center, which is a centralized planning, design, and construction office for the National Park Service, and we're part of a visitor use management team. And we also both are a part of the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. I chair the council, and Susan is one of our technical advisors. So we may be having some technical difficulty with the slides. So hopefully you all can see the slides again. We were having a bit of a challenge there. So moving on to what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you an overview of the Council and then talk a little bit about the work that the Council is doing, and then spend the majority of our presentation time talking about a current application of the new Visitor Use Management Framework to a National Park Service unit, and that would be Zion National Park. So kicking off the presentation, I wanted to start with why this is so important, and clearly all of you believe in its importance. You're a part of organizations that support good, sustainable visitor use management. And we really like to think about visitor use management as being proactive, and by being proactive in managing use, we can encourage access, improve visitor experiences, and protect resources and values. It's a really critical component of the missions of the agencies that are part of the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. And I wanted to make a note, sometimes visitor use management can be misunderstood as something that's about trying to keep people out of public lands and resources, and really that's not true at all. Rather, it's about thinking strategically and proactively about how to encourage access and connect visitors with resources in a sustainable way. And if we do this well, we can actually welcome visitors to great experiences and protect our resources. And as I mentioned, this is a really vital part of our collective missions as agencies. Next slide. Here in the United States, we've had a lot of recent media on visitor use management. It's been getting a lot of attention. A lot of our units across our 6 agencies have had a lot of changes in visitation over the last few years in particular. And so that's gotten a lot of press, and there's been a lot of dialogue about what to do to address these changes in visitation on U.S. public lands. We've really seen this as an opportunity to raise attention and awareness on the need to do good visitor use management across all of our public land agencies. Okay, sorry, we're still having a few technical problems. Here we go. So the Council, as Anna already described, we are working together to really provide a unified voice for excellence in visitor use management, and to really focus on long-term policy and guidance needs that the agencies have. And we're doing that through building technical competencies and improving interagency coordination. The Council was formed in 2011. It's the first time these 6 federal agencies have come together to work on this particular topic. And we've been working on a number of really important guidance documents that the 6 agencies are sharing. We have 2 position papers, one on visitor use management and one on visitor capacity. And those are both out on our website. You can see the web address there on the slide, hopefully. And those are available to read, and they really form the foundation of the Visitor Use Management Framework, which we'll be talking a lot more about today. And that framework really builds on the lessons from past frameworks and really gives the 6 agencies a cohesive approach to how they're going to manage visitor use on public lands. We also have 2 additional guidebooks that are in development that help provide more detailed guidance for 2 important steps of the framework. That's the indicators, thresholds, and monitoring step of the framework, and we have a monitoring guidebook in development, and also a visitor capacity guidebook that helps address that particular piece of the framework. And those are in development and will be out for internal reviews and external reviews over the course of this next year. And then we're also working on training, online training, that'll be accessible to everyone, and that training will provide an overview of the guidance from these different guidebooks and the framework documents. So now we'll jump in and talk more specifically about the framework itself. This really is the basis for our overall approach as agencies to how we're looking at making good decisions and day-to-day management activities around managing visitor use. So we have four basic elements of the framework. One, starting off with building the foundation. The second, really looking at how we define management direction for visitor use. The third being to identify management strategies. And the fourth is the adaptive implementation component of the framework, where we continually monitor and adapt. Universal to all of the steps of the framework are law and policy requirements for the agencies. Those, of course, guide how this framework is implemented for each of the agencies. Also, the concept of the sliding scale is used at every element and step of the framework, and I'll explain that more in a moment. And then, of course, public and stakeholder involvement, really making sure that we're working with our public and stakeholders while we're using this process is very, very important. You may be familiar with some of the past frameworks, like limits of acceptable change and the visitor experience and resource protection frameworks that the agencies had developed previously. And certainly much of what we have in the current framework will look similar if you're familiar with those past frameworks. We've really tried to take the best of those past frameworks and incorporate lessons learned from applying those frameworks over the last couple of decades. Some of the key differences in the new framework are applying the sliding scale, which I just mentioned, as a way to approach projects to ensure that the new framework is really applicable across all kinds of different situations and settings of public lands. We really have been worked hard to be clear about where visitor capacity fits within the overall framework. We also now have consistent terminology that the 6 federal agencies are using, which is a first. We used to talk about a lot of the same things but use different vocabulary, and now we have a shared vocabulary. And we've really tried to develop a process that works with all of our agency decision-making planning processes. So I'll talk a little bit more about the sliding scale. This is really to help the framework be applied, as I mentioned, across all different situations to ensure that the investment of time and money and other resources for the effort is really commensurate with the complexity of the project and the consequences of the decision that will be made. So when you're dealing with issues that have really small impacts, it will require less depth and breadth of analysis than those situations that are much more complex and have impacts of greater significance. The sliding scale is applied in each element of the framework. When Susan goes through her case study, she'll be talking about where her case study fell on the sliding scale and how that guided the approach of using the framework in that project. So really the process doesn't vary with project complexity, rather the investment of time and resources is what varies. And you can see here on the screen some of the considerations or criteria for how you determine where you are on the sliding scale: the complexity of the project, the amount of risk associated with impact, the degree of stakeholder involvement, and the level of controversy and potential for litigation, all help inform where you land on the sliding scale. So the overall framework, as I mentioned, has those 4 elements. Within those 4 elements, there are a number of steps. I'm going to go through each of the overall elements and steps very briefly, and then Susan will be sharing her case study and how it applied each of those elements and steps. So the first element is building the foundation. This is a really important piece of the process where we clarify the purpose and need for the project. We really look at the area's purpose and management direction that might already exist. We ground ourselves in existing information and current conditions. And we also really think about how we're going to approach this project. It helps us understand what needs to be done and how to organize our planning efforts. The next step of the element of the process is to define visitor use management direction. And this includes a number of critical steps as well. This is where we define desired conditions, which really serve as the point of reference for all the decisions we're going to make about how we manage visitor use. We need to know what we're trying to achieve in terms of desired conditions. And we also, in this element of the framework, define what's suitable in terms of visitor uses, facilities, and services, and also what's acceptable in terms of level of impact. This is where we do what we refer to as the indicators and thresholds step of the process. And that really helps us determine how we're going to track conditions over time to assess progress towards achieving those desired conditions. In short, this element really clarifies what we're managing for across our different areas and different units in public land. Moving on to element 3. This is often the fun part for the interdisciplinary team working on a project, the managers in the room who really are problem solvers by nature. This is where we really get a chance to look at what those management strategies need to be for managing use in order to achieve desired conditions. In this element, we look at the differences between what existing conditions are compared to those desired conditions. We assess the strategies that might be needed to achieve desired conditions. And also, where necessary, we identify visitor capacities and associated strategies to manage use levels within capacities. And lastly, we look at monitoring strategies to support those indicators and thresholds that we identified earlier. I'm going to spend just a quick more minute on step 9 of the process that I just mentioned about identifying visitor use management strategies and actions. Just to show a little bit more about what that step might look like, we really have a very large toolbox in the for managing visitor use. There's many tools, and on the screen you can see some of the types of strategies we might consider, everything from modifying behavior or type of use to looking at how we increase the ability of a site to support visitor use. And at times we may need to look at reducing use or possibly increasing the supply of opportunities. So there's a very wide range of options that we have at our disposal to think about how to manage use in order to achieve desired conditions. An important part of this toolbox is at times setting visitor capacities, which really help us focus in on the question of how much use can be accommodated in any particular area to achieve the desired conditions, both resource and visitor experience. And this step requires some additional analysis typically, and we start with thinking about what's the appropriate scale for making visitor capacity decisions. So that's the analysis area. And then we think about what we already know about that area and what might be the most limiting attribute in terms of how many people can be in that area and still achieve those desired conditions. And all of that then helps us inform the capacity for that area. And we also, as part of this step, need to think about how we might need to implement that capacity, whether that would be through changes to facility sizes or educating people about the coming at off-peak times, to also looking at maybe more direct management actions like permitting or reservation systems if the area is in high demand. And then the last element of the process is that implementation, evaluation, and adjustment that I mentioned earlier. And that element really is where we start implementing the ideas that have come out of the framework, the strategies that were considered, and we evaluate and monitor the success and effectiveness of those strategies. And then that helps us know if we need to make changes over time to better adjust how we're managing use to achieve desired conditions. So that, in a very quick nutshell, is the framework and its various elements and steps. I'm going to be turning it over to Susan, who's going to be talking about the application of this framework to Zion National Park, which is an ongoing project that we have here in the National Park Service. Next week's webinar, Rose Verbis, one of our teammates here in the National Park Service and on the Interagency Council, will be talking about a project she's involved in at Petroglyphs National Monument. And then one of our other colleagues that's part of the U.S. Forest Service and who's also part of the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council, Karen Vidala, she'll be presenting some project work she did at the Pike National Forest. So with that, I'll turn it over to Susan.
All right, thank you, Carrie. So like Carrie said, I will be talking about Zion National Park. And to give folks a bit of context, Zion is located in the state of Utah in the southwestern corner where that little A flag is on the map. Zion is a beautiful place. It's very iconic. It's a place that many visitors want to come to, and there are really good reasons that people come here. There are amazing sandstone cliff walls and a beautiful river that runs through the area. There are great cultural resources as well, and there are some specific hikes, such as the one in the upper right that is of Angel's Landing, that really draw people's attention and really make it a popular place for people to come to. So visitation has been changing at Zion. In 2010, there were 2.6 million people who came to the area. In 2015, there were 3.6, and that increased even more. In 2016, we saw over 4 million visitors. So between 2010 and 2016, that's a 54% increase in visitation. What makes that particularly important is that most visitors who come to Zion come to a relatively small area. This is Zion National Park, and the yellow areas are our front country, the areas that we are currently planning for that I will go into. The vast majority of visitors come to the 6-mile long canyon that is in the orange circle. So it's a lot of visitors in a fairly tiny area. So what has changed recently? What has led to this increase of visitation? In 2000, the park implemented a shuttle system so that people could travel up the canyon in between different spots without having to park their vehicle at different locations. This really made an impact on Zion. It made it very efficient and was able to bring a lot more people into the park. It addressed a lot of the critical issues that the park were experiencing at that time, such as roadside vegetation being damaged and visitor safety concerns. Since 2000, this park has become more popular. More people have been coming to the area, one, because it's a wonderful place to visit. The United States has also seen low petrol or gas prices. More people are moving around. And the state of Utah has also been doing more advertising, letting people know about sites within their state, such as Zion. So all of those things have factored to people coming more and more to the park. More visitation has some really positive aspects to it. More people are getting to experience this great place. There are, however, some issues that have been developed with that increased visitation. So the downside of growing visitation, the park has seen a lot more congestion with parking, both in the town, the gateway community that is nearby the park, as well as within parking areas in the park. They have seen a 76% increase in emergency calls. There are long lines to get onto the shuttle, as well as for basic services such as restrooms and food. The park has been seeing damage to natural and cultural resources caused by visitors. There are also some concerns for health and safety problems on Angel's Landing, that really popular iconic hike. They have also been hearing increased complaints about people's experiences. So that has led the park to start a visitor use management plan. And I'm going to go through all of the steps of the visitor use management framework that Carrie outlined and share how we have been accomplishing those steps and using that framework. In terms of the sliding scale that Carrie described, Zion is on the more complicated side to the right. We're looking at managing a lot of people in a small area. The other areas of Zion are also wilderness, so they have some very different goals about them and different experience types, and there are some actions that we cannot do there. So that makes it a very complex set of issues. There's also a higher level of risk due to the resource impacts that the park is seeing, as well as impacts to people's experiences when they come to the park. There is a high level of stakeholder involvement in this plan, which I will go into some detail about. There's also a fairly high level of controversy for the type of actions that the park might take to manage visitor use within this area. So again, here's our framework overall. I'm first going to go through that element 1, that build the foundation. Before I get too far into that, I wanted to mention that public involvement is a very key part of this process, and that even before we started planning, the park held a collaboration clinic with local government officials, regional government, as well as sister agency representatives to really have everyone talk about the issues that Zion National Park is experiencing, but also what is going on in the nearby area. So they started engaging conversations even before planning. In addition, park staff has been holding stakeholder meetings with local community members, local businesses, to really talk about what they're seeing, what the park is experiencing, and to keep them up to date on what the planning process is doing. All right, so in element 1, the first step to clarify the project purpose and need, we developed a plan purpose statement. So the purpose of our plan is to establish visitor capacity for front country zones, particularly Zion Canyon, and implement adaptive strategies to manage visitor use and access during high use periods of the year, to mitigate crowding, protect park resources, and maintain a high quality visitor experience. So that is what we are setting out to do. Step 2 is to review the area's purpose and applicable legislation, agency policies, and other management direction. So this plan is very fortunate that we have a lot of great guidance from past planning efforts. So we took a lot of time to look at those past plans. They have a foundation document that outlines the purpose, significance, what's really fundamental to Zion National Park. They have a backcountry management plan that outlines how they manage their wilderness areas. They have a wild and scenic river plan for the Virgin River that runs through the park, as well as a general management plan. All of those plans outlined how this park should be managed. So we made sure that we checked in and understood what our guidance is right now. Step 3, assess and summarize existing information and current conditions. Due to that sliding scale and Zion being fairly complex on that sliding scale, they decided that it was very important to do a fair amount of data collection to really understand what visitors are doing, where they are going, to understand what's going on at the park. So they have been collecting data about transportation, about how often the shuttles run, about where people are parking. They have been collecting data on trail use, how many people are using different trails at different times of the day, at different times of the year. This summer, we are conducting visitor surveys at some really key locations like Angel's Landing, where a lot of people are interested in going, and we want to understand their perceptions of what's going on in those areas. So the park has been in the process to collect all of the information that they've done in the past, as well as to identify some of these new planning needs. Under step 4, develop a project action plan. Once we talked about the existing conditions, once we talked about what our past guidance from management plans were, we outlined what we need to address in our plan. So we identified some key issues and needs of a plan. So we recognize that we need to address rapid growing visitation and changing use patterns. We need to address natural and cultural resource impacts. Also recognizing that there is a diminished quality of visitor experience. Visitor safety and public health in those high use areas needs to be addressed, as well as some more operational pieces. There is a very heavy strain on park facilities and operations. It was very important as well for the park to think about how we are affecting local communities and how we are also being affected by local communities. And in relation to that, this plan is really seeking to have active communication with those stakeholders so that everyone can benefit from this plan ultimately. Okay, that is the end of the first element. Then we moved into the second element, the defining visitor use management direction. One second. Oops, skipped too far. Okay, within the second element, we discussed steps 5 and 6 basically at the same time. So we talked about defining the desired conditions for our project area, as well as starting to identify appropriate visitor activities, facilities, and services. Once again, our past planning guidance was really come into play here. We reviewed what the desired conditions were written about in past plans and talked about them and made sure that those desired conditions still held true. So an example of a desired condition for this front country high development zone that we're planning in, a desired condition for natural resources is that natural processes in the landscape will be greatly altered to accommodate visitors and support park operations. So that's one of many desired conditions for natural resources. Another example, a desired condition for visitor experience is that generally the experience will be highly social with frequent interactions among visitors and park staff. So as Carrie said, these desired conditions are very important for us to understand what we want to accomplish, what we want to achieve over time. Further within that step 6 of defining appropriate visitor activities, facilities, and services, we started looking at potential management strategies. So what actions are we going to take to resolve all of those issues, to address those things that we said that we needed to address to accomplish the purpose of our plan? So I've written here just a list of a couple of the key strategies that we identified. They include establishing visitor capacities for Zion National Park. We have thought about implementing to those capacities through a timed entry system or a reservation system. Talked about modifying shuttle stops, so we may do express buses between different routes. Changing how campgrounds are managed to be in all reservations. Also looking at some redesigning of one of the entrances so that congestion is not as much of an issue. constructing new trails. A key strategy is to create pre-planning tools like websites or phone apps or other information so that people really know what to expect to get at the park before they arrive. Another strategy is day use permits at key locations. So again, public involvement comes into play here. The park at this point in the plan has continued to hold those stakeholder meetings. So gone and talked to all those community members and told them what we were thinking in the plan and get their input of what they're seeing from their perspective. We then, in the fall of 2016, last year, we conducted public listening sessions where we presented to the public this and more list of potential strategies that the park is considering and asked the public for their feedback. So we asked the public what strategies they thought would be the most helpful to address our issues. And we also asked them what other strategies they think that we need to consider. Okay. Also within this element, this last April, we had a workshop to select our indicators and establish thresholds. So we're still working on this step, but these indicators are the things that we are going to monitor and track over time to see how resource conditions are doing. So we are going to be tracking visitor-created social trails, encounter rates, how many people pass on a trail, soil loss, so some vegetation issues. Human waste is unfortunately an issue that needs to be addressed. So we'll track that over time, as well as incidents of vandalism to cultural resources. That moves us into the third element of the framework, to identify management strategies. And so this is where we are right now in our planning process. We are currently working within that third element. So within step 8 of compare and document the differences between existing and desired conditions and looking for use-related impacts, we are currently taking all of the information that we have, all of that data, and writing about the current conditions, the existing conditions at Zion. And then we will be very soon doing that comparison between existing conditions, what's going on now, and those desired conditions that we articulated. Step 9, identify visitor use management strategies and actions to achieve desired conditions. So we took the public comments that we heard last fall, as well as further discussions within our agency, and we are currently developing a range of alternatives. We're developing two sets of actions that we think we could take to achieve our planned purpose. We will be taking that to the public this summer, next month in July, and get, again, their feedback on that. Another step that we are currently working on is 10, which is to identify visitor capacities and additional strategies to manage use levels. So we talked about that in our April workshop this year. We will be looking at all of that data that we have collected, as well as the discussions we had in that workshop, and we will be working on identifying that capacity so that when we choose a management strategy, we have a way to implement those management strategies. So that is where we are right now. We're in that third step. We are moving towards that fourth part of the framework, but not there quite yet. I wanted to give you all of this website. This website is where when we take something out to the public, and that includes international as well as folks in the United States, we put updates on this website and draft plans as they're released, so you can find out where we are in the process by visiting this website.
Thanks, Susan. So that's the end of our presentation, and we wanted to open it up now for questions. And if you could